Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another lesson of How the Story Ends. It has been a while for me since I've been in here teaching this. I know you guys have been watching each week, but right before I got COVID, I did like 3 or 4 weeks worth of lessons, and this is my first day back. So you may hear a little bit of a cough. Fear not. I'm doing fine. Everything's good. Looking forward to finishing up this section that is called Finally the Good Stuff Part 2. And basically, for those of you that maybe are jumping in a little bit late, we've been spending a lot of time in this introductory paragraph in Revelation 19, because obviously the thing we've been talking about and working towards, what I call the climax of the entire story, the defining climax of the redemption part of human history, is the return of the King. It's the return of Jesus from heaven to earth with his armies to judge the wicked and set the righteous free. Like that's what we've been building towards and building towards and building towards. And now that it's finally here, it's ironic that the Apostle John starts off not by jumping into the action. Like that's how I would be tempted to do. Like, what's happening? Instead, he freeze frames on Jesus almost. And for 6 verses, from verses 11 down to verse 16, we have just a description of who Jesus is. Now that fits what Revelation is all about, because Revelation is called, at the very beginning, if you look at the very first verse of the book, it says this is the revelation of Jesus Christ that he passed along through John. So the point of Revelation, the book, is that we see Jesus clearly. Yes, we need to know what happened and what is going to happen to be prepared for it. And I believe, as I've said many times in this series, that this book is written primarily for the generation that's going to live through these experiences, so that they can have some sense of guidance as far as what in the world is going on, and they can have the right focus and hold on to their loyalties to Christ, okay? So the book is about telling us, yes, what happened, but primarily it's about revealing Jesus Christ. And so the last 2 weeks we've talked about this at length, and I do apologize. I know I sometimes can go off a little bit off the rails, but I want to show you how these verses connect to various parts of scriptures all over the place. You know, we talked about the fact that Jesus is faithful and true. Everything he says can be depended on. He is, if he makes a promise, he's going to keep it. Here he is, finally coming back. He'd promised to come back. In the Old Testament, the Messiah had promised to come and judge the enemies of Israel. And now he's finally come. And he's coming as a righteous warrior. A warrior who is only fighting because this is the right thing to do in this moment. He's not fighting because he loves to fight. He's not fighting because he loves to be violent. He loves to hurt people. It's that now the time has finally come to liberate his people, and there are people that are in the way of his people being liberated, and so he has to fight. His eyes are like fire. He's all-seeing. He's all-knowing. He can see it all. He knows it all. Nothing will be hidden from him. His eyes will burn through any obstacles and see what needs to be seen. And then we talked about the fact that he has his own identity, right? He has a name written on himself that nobody else knows. The reason that's true is because he gave the name to himself. He defines his own identity. He defines his own destiny. And then we talked about the fact that he is also God's avenger. He's God's avenger. And then we ended up last week, very end, with the statement that he is the Word of God. So John, here in Revelation 19, is circling all the way back to the very first words he ever wrote in the Bible from John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. And just in case you're curious about who the Word is, in verse 14 of John 1, he says, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And the idea is this Word, this revelation of the Father, is Jesus Christ. And here he is, finally come, returning to bring justice and rescue and judgment to the world. So before we move on, though, to the actual battle itself, there's a couple more things that we need to talk about with Jesus, and we're going to hit this, I think, fairly quickly. Would you read with me, please, starting in Revelation 19, verse 15, okay? Verse 15 says this, from his mouth, whose mouth? Jesus' mouth, comes a sharp sword with which to strike down the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron. He will tread the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God the Almighty. On his robe and on his thigh, he has a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Now, I'm fairly certain you guys know this by now, but we're still finishing up the notes from the last 2 weeks. If you haven't done that, please go really quick, push pause, go up to fbchh.org, and on the resources tab, the ABF Notes will be there. If you're watching in person, I made sure we printed some, and there should be some in the back there. You can grab a set of notes. But we're starting from where it says his goal. So what is the goal? We'll talk about the sharp sword that comes out of Jesus' mouth in a little bit, which I know is an odd picture, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. But for now, the thing I want to focus on is, what is the sharp sword coming out of Jesus' mouth to do? There's actually two things, okay? Number one, to strike down the nations, it says in verse 15. And then it says this, and he will rule them with a rod of iron. Now let's talk about the first part, which is to strike down the nations. Okay, this talks about Jesus's goal. Like, why has he come back? Why has he split open the heavens? And now why is he returning to earth? The first reason he's returning to earth, and this is your first blank here under his goal, which is to punish some. To punish some. Now, the interesting thing, and I already talked about this, is that the Antichrist has assembled the armies of the world. Now, not all the people of the world, mind you. There are some people who are not at this battle. There's people spread out all over the globe. I presume, even though many people have been judged by the judgments of the tribulation period, and the population of the world is much smaller than it, excuse me, than it obviously would be before the tribulation period. So we're talking, I know we're talking about a much smaller group of people. However, this does not mean that every human still alive has been, brought together to this moment. Now that becomes really important because everybody who battles against Jesus in this army is going to die. Every single person. If you look at the first arrow, we'll come back to the second blank on the previous line in a moment, but the first arrow says all the combatants, all the fighters, all the soldiers, all the warriors will be struck down by the sword from his mouth. So in other words, every person who dares take up weapons against Jesus at the battle here, the final battle in front of Jerusalem, every single person who defies Jesus by sticking a sword or a gun up to heaven saying, come on, I dare you, take it. Come and get it, Jesus. You want the world, you're going to have to rip it from our dead fingers. Every single person who takes arms against Jesus on that day will be struck down, the text says. Struck down. And in fact, there's some pretty intense descriptions of just the sheer amount of blood and just gore and death. We're going to get to that in a little bit too. I mean, this is pretty intense. But we need to understand Jesus' goal when he comes back is to strike down the combatants, okay? All those who have taken up arms against him, all those who are in rebellion, eager to get rid of him and to fight him being enthroned as the king over the world, all those people are going to die. But here's the interesting thing, and I know that's the part that gets the press, right? Yeah, Armageddon, Jesus comes to kill all of his enemies. Jesus must be this bloodthirsty, violent warrior. Rawr, we should be afraid of him, blah, blah, blah. Well, here's a really interesting thing, though. Did you notice the second part of that verse, verse 15? It says, and he will rule them with a rod of iron. Now, rule. The Greek word that is translated rule is poimen. Now, you're like, poimen? Well, I'm really glad you said that. Totally makes sense to me now. No, I know. I'm not doing the Greek word thing to impress you or to think it's really smart, but poimen has another translation in the English language. In fact, it is probably the most common translation into English. Poimen means shepherd. Shepherd. Now, this goes all the way back to King David, doesn't it? Right? David started off as a shepherd boy, right? And he learned the lessons of leadership as a shepherd boy, taking care of sheep, protecting them from enemies, right? Nurturing them, leading them to still water, all the beautiful things that we read about in Psalm 23. David is a shepherd, and then David later on becomes the king of Israel. And it's clear, God makes it very, very clear, hey, David, I took you from shepherding the sheep to shepherd my people Israel. And what's the idea there? Is that a king, his responsibility is to look at his subjects as his flock, okay? They're valuable to him. They're precious to him. Their survival matters to him. They are not to be used for the shepherd's personal gain. The shepherd is a servant of the flock. And usually, interestingly enough, just like David was shepherding the flocks of his father, right? So these are not David's sheep to play with. If he decides, I'll just let one run away because it's too much trouble, I'm just going to let it, there it's lying with its leg broken, bleeding. I'm just going to run away and let the wolves take care of this annoying sheep that's been bugging me. That's his dad's sheep. If he doesn't come home with that sheep, guess who's going to be ticked? Guess who's going to require an accounting of every single sheep? It's Jesse, David's father. And so I think that's the reason why this idea of ruling comes to be associated with the idea of shepherding, because the sheep don't belong to the shepherd in a sense. The sheep belong to the owner, and the shepherd is sort of a delegated representative of the owner. And so he has to take care of the sheep. He has to love the sheep. He has to protect them from enemies. He has to provide for their needs. He is not there to, in a sense, fleece the sheep. That's not the biblical model of leadership. It never has been, and it never will be. So it's really interesting. Jesus is now come to rule the nations as a king. But how is he going to rule these nations? He's going to rule the nations as a shepherd shepherds his sheep. So the idea is that it's an interesting combination, okay? Well, let me go back up to the first set of blanks, right? It says his goal is to punish some, right? All those who take up arms against him at this battle of Armageddon. He's going to make a point. You cannot oppose me. You cannot defeat me. Boom. All those people, who knows how many thousand, who knows how many million perhaps, they're all going to die. However, those who survive, not the battle, but all the people spread out throughout the world who survive the tribulation judgments and who survive the punishment of Armageddon, all of those people are going to live and enter into the kingdom of Jesus as his subjects, okay? So his goal is to punish some, but to shepherd others. I don't want you to picture Jesus coming to earth like, all of the alien movies about how the aliens want to come and, kill all of the inhabitants of the earth to steal the earth's resources and then go on to the next planet. Like every sci-fi movie of the last 30 to 40 years, we have an alien invasion, right? The War of the Worlds, stuff like that. That's what it's all about, right? Eliminate the natural population, take the resources, move on to the next planet. That is not how Jesus is going to be. Yes, he has a goal to punish those who have the audacity to take up arms against him, because that reveals the hardness of their heart. And he's going to allow their choice of rebellion to be their choice, and he's going to punish them appropriately. He's going to strike them down. However, there are many people connected probably to those people, the families, the wives, the children, the older people, those who are not healthy enough to go out to battle. They're all still going to be living on all these planets, all these different continents and all these nations. And those people, I believe, are going to have an opportunity to enter into the kingdom of Jesus as long as they enter into that kingdom as his loyal subjects. So it's almost like Jesus is giving the rest of the world, not the battlers, not the soldiers, not the people that are like, we don't want you, we're going to fight you. Those guys are not going to make it. Everybody else is going to get an opportunity. And again, we're going to look at another passage in just a moment that shows us that there may be some kind of a standard Jesus uses about who gets chosen to enter into this kingdom from all the Gentile nations of all the survivors. Okay? But I want you to get this idea. And so look at the second arrow. Okay, the second arrow. There will be non-combatants, right? What that means is you just think about it in a war zone now, right? Like if you're fighting on the streets of Fallujah in Iraq, there's going to be bad guys mixed in amongst the normal citizens. There's combatants, right? The insurgents, mixed in with non-combatants. And so when you're a military person in Fallujah, for example, and if you're going through trying to find the bad guys, you can't just mow everybody down and say, well, I got the bad guys. Sure, I got some innocent kids and I got some innocent women too. When that happens, we throw a fit about it and we go crazy, and we should. Because soldiers need to be discerning with the way they use their power. And Jesus is going to be discerning. He's not going to just come and wipe everybody out and say, okay, you Christians who survive that are hiding in holes in various places around the world, you guys can come out of hiding and you enter the kingdom. Apparently, he's going to open the opportunity, the door to non-combatants around the world, back to the statement, who will survive this battle and will have the opportunity to enter Jesus' kingdom as his, and here's the next blank, subjects, as his subjects. In other words, nobody's going to just be like, look, hey, do you want me to be your king? And they're like, no, not really. I don't want you to be my king. I want to do my own thing. I want to have my own independence. That's not going to fly. That's not going to play. However, though, if you're willing to take upon yourself the burden, I guess, or the yoke, the responsibility of being one of Jesus' loyal subjects, maybe even trading teams, right? I was on this team and now I'm trading to a different one. If you're willing to do that, then you're going to enter into the kingdom. Now, let me explain to you what's going on here. So if you go to Matthew chapter 25, Matthew 25, we have a very interesting passage. And sometimes this passage, I think, is improperly used. Now, there's an emphasis in this story that I think applies to all generations. But this story applies primarily to the end times, and specifically to the time of the 70th week of the book of Daniel, or what we commonly call the tribulation, okay? So I think it specifically applies during that 7-year time frame. However, there are applications that you can take from this for everyday life. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But Matthew 25, verse 31, okay? Matthew 25, 31 says this, when the Son of Man comes in his glory. Now, I'm sorry, that connects perfectly to Revelation 19, right? He's coming, he's splitting the crowds, he's in his glory. Nobody thinks he's this mild-mannered carpenter from Nazareth anymore. They recognize him for the holy warrior king that he is, and he's coming back to earth. So basically, Jesus is saying, look, when that happens, he says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. And before him, listen to this, will be gathered all the nations. Now, we've already found out it's not the soldiers we're talking about, because the soldiers are all dead. However, all the nations, all the people from the Gentile world that are out there are going to be gathered to Jesus at some location. We don't know exactly where this is going to be. And look what he says. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people from one another. Listen to this. As a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. Do you see that idea of shepherding connecting once again to how he's going to rule the nations? So he, as the shepherd, is going to be seated on the throne, and all the non-combatants from the world, all the people out there who didn't come to the Battle of Armageddon, but who were sort of connected to, in some way, the kingdom of the Antichrist. They're all going to be brought before Jesus, and then Jesus is going to go through, and he's going to pick some to be a part of his kingdom, and he's going to pick some to not be a part of his kingdom. Now, the standard is really interesting. Take a look here at verse 33. He will place the sheep on his right, but the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right. So which one is that? It's the sheep. Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. So if you're one of these Gentiles and you're put into the sheep category, then you are going to enter into the kingdom. You're going to be one of Jesus's subjects in his kingdom. You're going to make it into the kingdom of God. Now that's a little bit strange. Like, why should they? Shouldn't this be just for the Jews only? Apparently not. Let's keep reading. Verse 35, for I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. So hold the phone. Hold the phone. So we got two categories of people. Where's my pen? It's right here. Where's my pen? So we've got sheep over here on the right. We've got goats over here. Now, oh, whoops, sorry, did I lose the screen? Goats and the sheep. These are both Gentiles. Okay? They're the nations. That's always a synonym for the Gentile world. Okay? So we have the Gentiles, and some of them are going to be sheep, some of them are going to be goats. Now, what is going to be the differentiating factor is that the sheep are going to be people who take care of Jesus's brothers during the tribulation period. Now, we've talked a lot about the fact that during the tribulation, the Jews and the Christians, and it's going to be an interesting mix and combination of that, because Jesus is going to be the one who is allied with the Jews and with Christians, and the true believing Jews and true believing Christians are going to be the ones that believe in Jesus, not just believe in the Torah. But anyway, all the people who are aligned with Jesus, who are part of Jesus, they're going to be hunted, they're going to be persecuted, they're going to be sought to be grabbed and brought before the image of the beast and killed. Like, it is going to be dangerous to be a follower of Jesus during this tribulation period, whether you're a Jewish person or you're a Gentile Christian who is still trying to be faithful to God. But here's the crazy thing. There will be people in the world who aid and help Jewish people. Now, it's really quick side note. So I've been to Israel, and I've been to the Holocaust Museum in Israel. And there's this really beautiful, almost like a little bit of a garden at the end after you come out of this horrifying museum, that if you're not in tears by the time you're done with that museum, check your pulse. You may not be alive, or you may be a human. You may not be human at all. I was a wreck as I come out. And I come outside, and all of a sudden there's this like avenue, this courtyard with all these beautiful trees. And what it's called is the courtyard or the avenue of the righteous Gentiles. And every tree that has been planted was planted in honor of a Gentile in Europe who shielded the Jews during World War II, during the Holocaust. So if you've seen the film Schindler's List, or at least heard of it, based off of a historical figure named Oskar Schindler has his own tree planted in Israel in honor of him. And he's called a righteous Gentile because he protected Jews during World War II when he could have just turned them over to the Nazis. It's almost the exact same principle here. There are going to be non-combatants throughout the world that don't buy into all this stuff that the Antichrist, the beast, and the false prophet and the dragon are selling. They may go along to get along, but where they can, they're going to protect Jews who are being persecuted and hunted down and killed. They're going to protect Christians who are being persecuted and hunted down to be killed. They're going to go out of their way to hide them, to send food to them, to protect them, You know, you've heard of the story of Corrie ten Boom, right? The hiding place, how she and her family built this secret room. You know, Corrie ten Boom and almost her whole family got taken off to the camps because they were suspected of hiding Jews. And yet the Jews who took refuge in that house were never found, and they survived. Corrie ten Boom would be one of these people. Her sister who died in the camps, her father who I think died in one of the other camps, a different camp. They would be considered these righteous Gentiles. Now, in today's world, in the world of the Holocaust, they were Christians, right? But they were technically a part of Dutch society who sort of said one thing to the Nazis, and then they hid Jews secretly. And that shows their righteousness. So the standard by which the shepherd determines whether or not you get to be a part of the kingdom or not. Now, remember, this is not the same as being saved, right? You and I think of being saved, we think about having our sins forgiven and having a relationship with God restored. It's not, I don't think, exactly the same thing. I think this is someone who is a part of that thing, who doesn't buy into it, who goes out of his way with his actions to protect Jews and Christians who are being persecuted and provide for them. Those people are going to be given the opportunity to enter into the kingdom as one of Jesus' subjects. That's the prize. It's not eternity in heaven with Jesus when you die, because Jesus is going to be on earth, for one thing. And secondly, it's going to be much more about their physical salvation from death, right? And I think that is going to lead to spiritual salvation, okay? But it's not the same thing. Being made a sheep versus a goat means you're in the kingdom, you get to be alive, you get to experience it, you get a chance to be ruled, to be shepherded by the Lamb, to be shepherded by Jesus. You goats, however, take a look at verse 41. Then he will say to those on his left, right? That's the goats, the Gentile goats. He'll say, depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, you did not welcome me. Naked, you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, you did not visit me. Then they also will answer, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not minister to you? Then he will answer them, saying, truly I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. The standard for this judgment, this dividing of the Gentile world into two camps, the standard is, did you take risks to take care of my people during the tribulation? If you did, then you get the opportunity to come into my kingdom, and we'll work out the salvation personally stuff as we go along. But you get to live in this new, redeemed, beautiful world in the kingdom of Jesus. You get to be a part of it. And those of you over here, you're the ones that either were hunting down Christians, you were informing on Jews, you were, or just ignoring them in their plight. And this gets back to something that is constantly on Jesus' mind that we struggle with. And it's this idea that your actions matter more than your words. What you do proves what you really believe more than what you say you really believe. So these Gentiles here are showing with their actions, they're putting their own physical lives at risk to protect vulnerable people. And they do it maybe because they just think it's the right thing to do, or maybe they know these people are the Jews that are associated with Jesus. And for Jesus' sake, I'm going to protect these people. I'm going to feed them. I'm going to hide them. I'm going to get them to safety. I'm going to do whatever I can to protect them. And anyway, Jesus makes it clear, look, it's your actions that really show what you believe. And I know this is tricky. It's a little uncomfortable. Because I want to be able to tell you that if you just say the right words in a prayer, and you just kind of go through the right processes, that you're fine. Because you said it. And there's a sense in which the Bible says if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart, you're saved. And I'm not trying to say that if you're a bad Christian, as I am in many ways, that all of a sudden now what you said has no value. And if you're not perfect, then you, no, I'm not saying any of that garbage. That's all an exaggeration and a lie. What I am trying to say is this. Jesus makes it very clear that what you do is what you really believe, not what you say. And these righteous Gentiles, he calls them righteous, are people who have engaged in right action. And because they've engaged in right action towards persecuted Jews and Christians during the tribulation, they put their own lives at risk to do that, they're going to get an opportunity to be a part of Jesus' kingdom. Now, it is interesting, if you go back to Revelation 19, he says he's going to rule them with a rod of iron. Now, what I think that means is that all these people who get into the kingdom, they're going to be on a bit of a short leash. See, the way Jesus operates in our world today, and I've been thinking about this a lot even personally in my own life, right? Like if I ignore Jesus on a personal level for a few days, a few weeks, a few months, right? If I kind of just put him on the back burner, I don't always get a day-by-day punishment for that, right? It's not like if I didn't spend any time praying and talking to God today, that when I go to bed, I'm going to get a pain in my leg that makes it hard for me to sleep. Now, if that happened, if every time I forgot to pray, I got this agonizing pain in my leg, who knows? Maybe I'd be more motivated to do the praying that I'm supposed to be doing. But Jesus doesn't run the world that way, at least not right now. The consequences for our sin even are not always immediate. You can get away with stuff for a while. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't eventually catch up to you. It does. It does. You know, the wages of sin are death. Like, it happens. But Jesus doesn't, on a moment-by-moment, day-by-day level, at least I don't think so, give us the punishments we deserve for the things we do. He kind of has sort of a hands-off approach. Well, I don't think he's going to have a hands-off approach during this millennial kingdom. These people that he admits into his kingdom, the righteous Gentiles who looked after the Jews, who looked after the Christians, were being persecuted, he's going to keep an eye on them because he doesn't want rebellion to grow in their hearts. He doesn't want them to be people who decide at some point in the future to lead a new rebellion and kind of start the whole process over again. So I think there will be, as again, in this kingdom, there's going to be flawed people in it. Now, they're believing people, but there's still going to be flaws and sin during this kingdom. It's going to be a different world. We'll talk about that a little bit in the next couple of weeks, but it's going to be a different experience, but it's certainly people who go into it alive are still going to be flawed and sinful. And he's going to manage that differently. There's going to be more immediate consequences. Like, I think about the story of Cain and Abel, right? Cain kills his brother. Now, God doesn't step in and prevent him from killing Abel. He gives Cain the ability to choose whether he's going to kill his brother or not. But when Cain kills his brother, the text says, then God said to Cain, where is Abel your brother? In other words, God comes right up to Cain, as far as we know, perhaps right after he's killed his brother, not very long afterwards anyway, and says, hey, Cain, where's Abel? I'm looking for him. And then Cain lies, and we get into this whole thing. God interacted with people on a much more individual basis. I think ruling with a rod of iron means you're on a short leash. When there is punishment, when there's sin, when there's disobedience, when people rebel, there will be punishments, and they will be fairly swift. But I still think it's an incredible display of mercy that Jesus is willing to give the survivors of the tribulation who are righteous and who looked after his people. He's going to give them a chance to willingly submit to his rule on earth. He's not going to say, oh, you were a part of that country that supported the Antichrist. So whether you individually did or not, you're going down. God does not lump people into these big identity groups and then just whack everybody because they're a part of the group. He looks at each individual heart and he gives you a chance to respond to him. He treats you as an individual. And here I think he's treating them as individuals. And again, remember, it is a rod of iron. There will be consequences for your sin. There will be punishment, and probably much more swift than what we experience in today's world. But he's still shepherding them, right? All the time. You remember how David says in Psalm 23, talking to God, your rod and your staff, they comfort me? Do you know what a rod and a staff was used for by shepherds? to whack the sheep upside the head so they don't wander away into dangerous things. Like a rod and a staff, sure, maybe it was to fight against predators and stuff, but it also had a function for the sheep, and it wasn't always pleasant for the sheep. Now, it was good for the sheep. It was long-term protecting them from bad stuff happening to them, but still, it was not pleasant. It was not easy. It was not fun for the sheep. And so what is happening here is he's like, look, I'm going to shepherd you Gentiles, right? You did the right thing during the tribulation. You looked after my people when they were vulnerable. So I'm going to shepherd you. And that means you're going to face my rod. You're going to face my, the shepherd's staff. And that's not going to be pleasant all the time. But it's going to be because I want to bring you back to the journey. I want to bring you back to the path. I'm going to be working for your good as well. In other words, the kingdom of God is not just for ethnic Jews. It's not even just for Christians who are Gentiles who survive the tribulation. The kingdom is going to be God, Jesus, the shepherd, the king, looking after everyone who's still alive, who's a part of his kingdom. Okay? Now, I know that may spark some more questions, and if you have questions, shoot me those questions. I mean, if we were here in person, we could all ask a million questions. But in the meantime, if you want to learn more, you got to take the extra step and send me a question on Messenger or an email or give me a call. Okay? But that's the best I got at this point. And again, there's some details of this we don't know. We don't know all the ins and outs of how Jesus is going to manage all this stuff. We just have these hints, and so we got to kind of piece them together. Okay, verse 16. On his robe and on his thigh, he has a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. What does this tell us about Jesus Christ? He is the ultimate, here's a blank, authority. Authority. Basically, he's the King of Kings. There is no king that can dictate who Jesus is or what Jesus is going to do. There is no king to whom Jesus owes his allegiance. Now, obviously, he owes his allegiance to his Father. But John isn't trying to differentiate between the Father and the Son. He's trying to point out human kings, Jesus. And there is no competition. There is no debate. Jesus is the king. Everybody else is just kind of along for the ride. They're under his authority, not the other way around. And of course, he's the Lord of Lords. There's no Lord, there's no master, there's no king, there's no leader who has authority over him. He has exclusive authority over them. They don't get to decide what happens from here on out because he's the King of Kings. He's the Lord of Lords. Harry Truman, I guess, had a sign on his desk, right? President back in the 1940s, I think early 50s. Harry Truman, the buck stops here. In other words, all of the issues, the decision eventually comes back to me. And the reality is that Jesus, I mean, if he had a desk, I don't know if he's going to have a desk in the new world. I hope not for his sake. But if he has a desk, there's going to be a big old sign that says, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, the buck stops here with me. And that's pretty awesome. And that's going to be written on his robe and on his thigh. So, like, he's going to have that, like, we're going to be able to read that. He's going to have his other name that we won't be able to read. But then we'll know kind of what it means because John says it's going to be written King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Now, one more thing I want to mention, verse 14. Verse 14. Verse 14 says this, and the armies of heaven, arrayed in fine linen, white and pure, were following him on white horses. So when Jesus comes, he's not just coming alone as a one-on-one battle to destroy everything. He is coming at the head of the armies of heaven, all right? So that's what goes in the next blank there. He has brought his armies with him, But the question is, who are these warriors? And honestly, it's not a very important debate because no matter which one you choose, it all sort of fits and makes sense. But here, there's basically three options, okay? The first option is that these armies that are coming with him are the armies of his angels. That's what goes under arrow number one. Option number one is his angels. Now, if you flip back to Matthew 16:27, what you find out in that verse says this, for the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay each person according to what he has done. So Jesus says, look, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, he's coming with his angels. He's coming with his messengers. He's coming with these basically, special force type armies to help him bring about the judgment of the world. So some people say, look, it's very clearly he's talking about his angels. We already read Matthew 25:31, where it says, when the Son of Man comes in his glories with his angels. And in Matthew 24, which is the chapter right before that, verses 30 and 31, it says this, then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Verse 31, and he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. So we know from at least 3 passages in Jesus' teaching ministry that when he comes back in his glory, he's bringing his angels with him. However, I don't think that's the end of it. Like that could just say, well, that settles it. God's word says it, that settles it. And, whatever the Southern Gospel song is, I can't remember right now. But I think it's a little more complicated than that, because if you take a look in Revelation 19, so we're back to Revelation 19, it says they're clothed in a certain way. They're arrayed in fine linen, white and pure, and then they're following him on white horses. As far as I know, the white horses thing doesn't really have a ton of significance, except to say that it looks like there's going to be animals in heaven, which I think that's kind of cool. I have a son who's pretty much addicted to animals, and if he contemplated an eternity without animals, I think he would think that it wasn't quite heaven. And I think we need to realize, too, that we'll talk about the new earth at some point, but God created animals, and even though they don't have souls as we do, and even though they won't have punishments and rewards as we do, God always intended for his earth to be filled with creatures besides humans. God has a deep, deep love for the created order. My wife is really funny. I love her to pieces. And she almost has this visceral reaction when we see an animal that maybe was hit by a car or something bad happened to it on the side of the road. Like I see them all the time. Like it doesn't affect me anymore. Like it's just kind of like whatever, cat, squirrel, whatever. My wife sees it and her face contorts into this look of not just disgust, which understandable. That's very understandable, but pity. And I think about that and I'm like, okay. That's appropriate. Like these creatures are not there for our entertainment, although they do entertain us. They're not there simply for our pleasure, although God allows us to use animals to meet our needs. I'm not saying that they somehow supersede humanity. I'm not saying that. But there's a certain honor and respect that is owed to the physical universe, and I would say also to the animal kingdom. Like, we ought not to treat the animals we come in contact with in a disrespectful way. And I have a son who talks to me a lot about the history of how humanity has interacted with animals and poachers and people who would slaughter animals to get something to make money. And I look at that and I think that is offensive to God. Now, I know I'm basing a lot of that off of just this idea that there's going to be animals in heaven. But I think what we need to realize is all of God's creation is precious, all of it. And just because he has given permission for a certain amount of time for us to use part of his creation for our own sustenance does not mean we're allowed to have an attitude of superiority, even though in some senses, yes, we are made in the image of God and we are superior, but we're not allowed to take advantage, and we're certainly not allowed to, I'm trying to think what the right word is, abuse the natural world that God has given us, the resources he has put here. It's on us to rule the world, to subdue it, yes, but to take care of it, to cultivate it, to shepherd it. And I love it that we're going to be that there's going to be these armies coming back on white horses. I think that's really cool. But that's a side note. Sorry, that was for free. Did you notice what they're wearing? They're wearing fine linen, white and pure. Well, if you go back just a few verses to the marriage supper of the Lamb that we talked about, verse 8, he's talking about the bride, verse 7. Let us rejoice and exult and give him the glory, for the marriage of the Lamb has come. His bride has made herself ready. It was granted her to clothe herself with fine linen, bright and pure. What are these armies wearing? Fine linen, verse 14, white and pure. Now, do you think that he forgot that 6 verses earlier he just said that? Like literally just said that? Not only that, but we've seen throughout the book of Revelation this white linen referring to a group of humans who are in heaven. Revelation chapter 6, verse 11, is talking about martyrs for their faith. Now, we don't know if this is the martyrs of all time or if it's just the martyrs of the tribulation time frame, but verse 11, right, they say, how long, God, chapter 6, verse 10, how long before you judge those who have killed us? And it says in verse 11, they were each given a white robe and told to rest a little longer. So, martyred saints are wearing these white robes. Chapter 7, verses 9 and 10. After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. These are, again, I believe, martyred people during the tribulation period who are standing in God's presence, and they represent all the nations. And they're wearing white robes. But then also, in verses 13 and 14, then one of the elders addressed me, saying, who are these, clothed in white robes, and from where have they come? I said to him, sir, you know. And he said to me, these are the ones coming out of the great tribulation. They've washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. So basically, in Revelation 19, not only in chapter 19, verse 8, just during the marriage supper of the Lamb, we talk about the bride. Option number 2 is these armies are actually, number 2, his bride. Christians, followers, believers in Jesus. Like everybody from the great warriors of the Old Testament, through the great warriors of the New Testament, through the great church heroes of the Middle Ages, and you and me, all of us who form the bride of Christ, who have been brought into a relationship with Jesus Christ. We will come back with him, and we will be a part of his armies that occupy the earth and destroy all of God's enemies at this final battle. Now, option number 3 is both. And honestly, this is where I land. I think his armies that are coming back on his white horses, yes, include all of his holy angels. And trust me, if God just had the angels on his side, he wouldn't need anybody else to help him. In fact, we find out later on, Jesus doesn't even need the angels. He handles it all by himself. Remember, because it's the sword that comes out of his mouth that will strike down the nation. So Jesus doesn't need any help, but he brings his angels, and I think he brings all of us, all of the saints who have died, who are in heaven already, and we come back with Jesus as a part of his conquering army. That seems to be the most obvious answer. In fact, the text seems to be deliberately ambiguous about who these armies are, because I think it's to say, hey, we're all coming back. We're all coming back. And maybe I'll be riding down from heaven on my white horse, and next to me there's going to be one of the Old Testament saints, King Josiah from the Old Testament. Over here is going to be the Apostle Paul, and then on either side of us is going to be one of the seraphim, and then on the other side of them is going to be, believers from China. We're all coming back, I think. We're all going to be a part of this army that helps to destroy God's enemies. Now, we finally exited that paragraph. And now we have a foreshadowing of the outcome of the battle. That's the next major point there. John foreshadows the outcome of the battle. So again, he still delays. It's funny because Jesus come back. Here's his armies. We know all about Jesus. It's like, can we find out what happened? Apparently not yet, because there's one more thing John wants to do before he tells us what happens. Verse 17 says this, then I saw an angel standing in the sun I'm not sure how he pulled that off, but he did. Must have seen like a silhouette against like the bright shining sun. He saw an angel standing in the sun, and with a loud voice he called to all the birds that fly directly overhead, "Come, gather for the great supper of God." Now, this is ironic, isn't it? This is incredibly ironic, because we just talked about, and I blubbered like a little idiot, we talked about the marriage supper of the Lamb, right? The marriage supper where God spreads out the blankets on the mountain of God, and he takes death away, and he takes shame away, and he takes sorrow away. Like you see joy, you see intimacy, you see relationship, you see healing. Like that's the marriage supper that we all want to be a part of in the kingdom. Well, what supper is going to take place before that supper happens? It's going to be a very different kind of supper. That's the next blank there, the star. There's a very different kind of supper. And this one is also hosted by God. Just like the supper on the blankets on the mountain of God in the kingdom, the marriage supper, even like that, is going to be hosted by God. This one is also hosted by God. Let's keep reading. He called to all the birds that fly directly overhead, "Come gather for the great supper of God, to eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of captains, the flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses and their riders, and the flesh of all men, both free and slave, both small and great." This is a very different kind of supper. This one is not comforting like the marriage supper. This is not healing. This is not a celebration. This is not a celebration of intimacy. This is horrifying. This is terrifying. Because before you can have the supper of healing, you have to have the supper of judgment. And it basically is a death sentence for everyone who raises a weapon against Jesus on this day. He's going to die, and the birds of the air are going to eat their carcasses. Just going to be lying there on the ground. And again, this is not a pleasant picture. But John, before the battle even happens, he tells us this is how it's going to end up. The birds are going to come and eat. Remember Goliath? Goliath said to David, when David was just a little shepherd boy, and saying, "You can't fight." Goliath's like, "Come here and let me feed your flesh to the birds of the air." And David turned it around on him and says, "No, we're going to feed your flesh to the birds and the beasts. We're going to leave your dead bodies out in the field to be mauled by animals and birds, scavengers." That's what's going to happen to all of these armies facing Jesus. Now, I do want you to take a look at Ezekiel 39, verses 17 to 22 sometime, because in that passage, there's a description of the end time events. And also in that passage, Ezekiel calls the birds to come and eat the bodies of those who die opposing the Messiah. So it's a really interesting connection from the Old Testament, but I think for the sake of time, I'm going to skip past that and just encourage you to go look that up. Again, it's a little bit on the grisly side, so if you're not into that right now, you can skip over that. But let's talk about the battle itself, because it's so funny. We build up to this huge battle, right? Like this great struggle between the Antichrist and the real Christ. And so you think this is going to be like this long description, and the battle is going to rage, and it's going to come down to Jesus killing the bad guy, and at the end, and then like you think that. You would think that because we built up so much drama and tension going into this moment. The description of the battle itself it's kind of ridiculous for how short and sparse it is. Like what we find out about this actual battle, if you're like into battle and military struggle and strategy, there is no strategy. There's no big, turning of the tide. There's no moment like, remember all the old movies when it like there'd be the guys in the forts, right? And the Native Americans would be circling, and then all of a sudden the cavalry would come and chase away the Indians or whatever. Nothing like that. Nothing like that. This isn't the Alamo. It's like boom. And it's over like before you can blink. But there is some things we learned. So take a look at verse 19, and I'm reading verses 19, 20, and 21. It's the last three verses. And then we're going to be done for today. And I saw the beast. So we're finally back to the beast. We took a break from the beast for a while, but the beast is there, and the kings of the earth are there. So beast, kings of the earth that he's gotten under his authority. He's kind of pulled them into this battle. Beast, kings of the earth, and then it says with their armies. So we have the beast, We have all of his kings that are under his authority, and all of their armies are gathered together here. That's why I'm saying these are the combatants, right? These are the soldiers. And they've gathered to make war against him who was sitting on the horse and against his army. So again, don't for a second think that the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies were just there minding their own business, and Jesus picked a fight with them, and Jesus, the big meanie, is coming to... No. They had gathered for that express purpose, to fight Jesus and any army he brought with them from heaven. And then it says here, verse 20, and the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet who in its presence had done the signs by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped its image. So we find out that during this battle, and apparently it doesn't take very long, the beast, who you think would be surrounded with the best warriors, right? Like, wouldn't you put like your elite guard around the beast to protect the beast? He gets captured in like 2 seconds. The false prophet who's there doing his bidding, who's been kind of like his number two, who has been sort of like, leading the whole world astray to worship the beast. These two are captured, it says. And what happens to them? These two were thrown alive into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur. So we're going to talk about this next time. But there is a difference between hell and the lake of fire. Just like there's a difference between your fireplace and the California wildfires of this last year. There's a big difference, right? Between the fire that's burning in your fireplace, giving warmth to your home, and the fires that are literally burning thousands of acres of beautiful land out on the West Coast. There's a big difference. So hell and the lake of fire. Hell is inhabited right now by a lot of people. Sadly, this is sadly true. Hell is inhabited by a lot of people who have rejected God and refused to believe in him throughout the ages. They are in hell. Hell is a temporary holding cell until the final judgment. The lake of fire is where you go after you've been convicted. And the lake of fire is permanent, apparently. And I'll say this too, right now, the lake of fire seems to be empty. There's nobody in the lake of fire right now. It was made for the devil and his angels at the end of time to spend eternity there. And the very first two occupants of the lake of fire are the beast and the false prophet. And you notice they skip the judgment. Like, they don't even get their day in court. They go straight from the battlefield to the lake of fire, thrown alive into the lake of fire. That is remarkable. Because the worst of the worst of the worst get an opportunity to have their day in court. We're going to talk about that next week or the week after. Everybody gets their day in court. Not these two guys. They have built up such, their sin and their guilt is so obvious that God doesn't feel like he needs to go through the process. He's just chucking them in the lake of fire. It's like, that's it, you're done. You led the world astray. You caused millions upon millions, perhaps billions of people to die for your sin and your rebellion. You assembled these armies that I had to execute because they were in opposition to me. That's on you, beast. That's on you, false prophet. And you're going to face a more severe punishment than anyone. You get thrown in early and you get thrown in alive without your day in court. But I want you to notice, the beast stays defiant to the end. That's the next blank there. The beast stays defiant to the end. Like when Jesus splits open the sky and starts riding his white horse with the sword coming out of his mouth. And I think, by the way, that's a metaphorical description of his word. Like he speaks and people die. Like he removes their permission to live, basically, by his word. And it just wipes everybody out. You would think that when he sees Jesus coming with all of his armies, he might go, oh, shoot. I didn't think this was going to happen. But here he is at the very end, And Jesus comes, and what's his instinct? Is it to throw down his sword and be like, I'm sorry, please be merciful? Is that his instinct? No. Even till the very end, he's defiant. He lifts up his sword and he shakes it at them and he says, I'm gonna be. And again, I don't know if he's foolish enough to think he can win, or if he's like, you know what, I'm so far gone, I might as well go out the way I went in. I don't know which it is. All I know is that he's still defiant, even now. The depths to which the human heart can become hardened are mind-blowing. And this cat proves that. So we talked about the beast and the false prophet were captured, and then the next blank is punished, right? They were punished. Oh, my goodness. Oof. I got a lot more to talk about. I might have to do this for another week. Anyway. All right, let me wrap this up, okay? The first arrow here says their punishment is, and here's the blank, it's distinguished from the rest of the combatants, okay? Now, this is going to introduce an idea that we're going to talk about next week, because I think it's important, and we don't often think about it, and you know what? I don't really get a chance to teach about it normally, so this is going to be my chance. So here we go. I want you to notice the beast and the false prophet. All right, let's get rid of the goats and we've already talked about these guys. Okay, so you have the beast, you have the false prophet, then you have the kings of the earth, and you have their armies. Now, they all are going to be punished, right? That's clear. The text makes it absolutely clear that they're all going to be punished. However, these guys get a different punishment than these guys do. They're all going to be punished, but they get different punishments. And the text is pretty clear. This punishment is more severe than this punishment. God is going to hold the beast and the false prophet to a higher level of accountability than he holds the kings of the earth and their armies. Now, is he going to hold the kings of the earth and the armies accountable for their actions? You better believe it. He's absolutely going to do that. However, he is not going to treat them as if they're exactly the same. Oh, you sinned once, everybody gets the same punishment. That's not how it works. The dragon, who, by the way, is the puppet master even for these guys, gets a different punishment than they even get. So God punishes people, get this is going to blow your mind a little bit, on a sliding scale. God punishes people based on their offenses, based on what they've done. And some people get more punishment than others. But this shouldn't surprise us, because Jesus taught regularly during his ministry that there are going to be various degrees of rewards that we get for faithfulness, and also varying degrees of punishment. We'll talk about that next week. But the key thing I want you to know, when Jesus comes back, he is going to face his enemies. He is going to destroy his enemies. He's going to hold them accountable. We're going to be with him, I think. The angels are going to be with him. And we're all together going to enter this planet and bring this planet back to God and to the way it's supposed to be. Next week, what we're going to do is we're going to wrap up these notes here with a couple more passages I want to show you. And then we'll probably go ahead and jump into the next set of notes, too, about what is called the Millennial Kingdom. We're going to talk about the kingdom itself. And again, in chapter 20 of Revelation, there's incredibly short details, like not very much information at all about what this kingdom is going to look like. But we'll dive into it and we'll talk a little bit about it, and I hope that it'll be helpful to you. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. I know this one went a little bit long. I think we're over an hour. I apologize. But I hope it was helpful to understand what's going on here in Revelation 19. We'll be back next week to finish up and start a little bit in Revelation 20. Thank you, guys. Have a great day. Hope you have fun. I'll talk to you later.